name is Sadie, and today I will be interviewing Dr. Cunniff, who is a neurologist who works for the Carolina Hurricanes Analytics Group. Could you describe a typical day of your job?
Yeah, so my job is data scientist, and what that means is basically trying to come up with new ways to use data to help make the hockey team better. And so my days are very variable because that's a mix of things, and we're trying out new stuff all the time. So some of that is looking at work other people have done to try and borrow stuff from. I spent a lot of time reading about soccer analytics because soccer analytics are better than hockey analytics. So trying to find things that they've done that I can then adapt for my stuff. A lot of it is sort of coding and parsing data. So we have messy data coming in and we want to do something with it. So just figuring out, okay, now that we have a question, how do we get from point A to point B? And that's like reformatting tables. So very necessary, not the most exciting part. Then it's evaluating whether these results make sense with what we know from watching the hockey team and what we think is happening, and then figuring out how to communicate that with other people at the job, because the work isn't useful if no one else in the organization can understand it, and not many people have the analytics background. So if I just start rambling at them with no explanation of what I'm talking about, no one's going to find that useful. So it's not doing all of that every day. It's that every day is, one of those, maybe a couple of those things. And just basically sort of chipping away at these big questions. So I've been at the job for, I guess, like 9 months now. Time is weird at the moment. So it's still in pretty early stages. So we're still doing a lot of, exploratory stuff and, laying the groundwork for future stuff. So still pretty flexible, still pretty up in the air.
What would you consider the most challenging part of your work?
Sort of what I was just saying about it being up in the air is both the sort of most fun part, but also the most challenging part. So it's a really big open-ended question. We're trying to create new things. And we're trying to, do stuff people haven't done before, which is great and is exciting. It's a lot of fun, but also that means people haven't done it before. So we have to figure it out as we go along. And there are some days where it would be really nice to just have someone to give me the answer, and unfortunately they don't exist. So it's an opportunity to try and solve these new problems, but that means solving them. So sometimes it's just banging my head against the wall, trying to work through some coding problem. But that also is, like I said, it's the downside to the incredible flexibility and opportunity. So I think it's worth the trade-off.
What part of the work do you find the most rewarding?
Two different parts. One of it is when my stuff can actually be used. So a lot of the stuff I'm doing is pretty big picture, and so we're pretty far off. So it's not really in the workflow yet, but have had some small one-off things, like helping prep for the NHL draft a couple weeks ago, and having things that I built to actually go into use for the team and see people finding them to be to their benefit, and not just sort of something I'm working on in isolation for no reason. And also just like I said, a lot of sort of the intermediate steps are coding and parsing data and not really getting results, and just sort of churning through making tables. And when that finally is complete and it turns out something that is interesting, is incredibly valuable, because it's sort of becomes sort of abstract numbers, and I forget sort of what I'm actually looking at, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is what I was trying to do, and it actually makes sense, and there's a reason I've been working on this, and it wasn't just spinning my wheels.
Okay. Do you work on analytics year-round?
Yeah, so normally the way things work for my department in general, so the department's 4 people, the newest member, but the oldest member has been there for like 5 years, so we're all pretty new. So normally everything's year round, and then the off season is a time to sort of work on bigger picture projects. So people spend a lot of time during the season doing stuff sort of on a game by game basis. And then in the summer, it's a time to take a step back and do more stuff overall. Like I said, since I'm sort of in the still new exploratory phase, all of my phase is sort of the big overall stage. So there actually isn't a huge difference for me at the moment. But in general, we do work year round and then take the summer and the off season to work on some harder, bigger stuff that is slower to produce results, but hopefully worth it in the end.
Does your neuroscience background help you at all?
Yeah, so it's obviously they're very different questions on sort of the literal level, but from a computational standpoint, they're weirdly similar, which is why I was able to make this transition. So a lot of the work I was doing in graduate school was asking questions about how different kinds of neurons work together to process information in the brain. And when you think about that as a data analysis problem, that's really not that different from how do different hockey players work together as a team to produce results. And so it's these sort of questions about taking big sets of messy data where there's a lot of information there, but you don't quite know how to get it out. So you have to figure out, okay, how do we deal with this data? How do we analyze it? How do we, ask useful questions about it? That is very similar between sort of the questions of the kind of neuroscience data I was using and then the hockey data. So, my training, a lot of the training in a PhD is less about sort of the facts you learn and more about designing experiments and interpreting stuff and analyzing stuff. So, the exact things I learned about different brain regions don't come up ever. But the questions, sort of the things I learned about how to ask those questions is incredibly relevant. And so, that's why that background actually prepped me well for this, despite it being, like I said, on its surface, a very different problem.
Do you have to travel a lot for your job?
No, so luckily we are normally just at home with the team. So in North Carolina, now we're at home completely because of the pandemic. Really our only big travel normally is the draft, which is normally in one place and everyone comes together. But this year that was also virtual. So I have done no traveling. Normally I do about one traveling a year, but we'll see about next year. But yeah, normally, a lot of the stuff we do doesn't depend on being there for games. So my coworkers and I go to all the home games because why not? But we're not really doing stuff, during the games or anything that requires us to be there. It's more after the fact stuff.
With the pandemic, how do you work with your colleagues?
So the good news and the bad news about my team is, like I said, it's pretty small and we all work very independently, which means it's been relatively easy for us to work from home. We basically have sort of one person in various roles. So my title is data scientist. I ask questions and I do weird experiments and read about weird math. One of my coworkers is the software engineer, so he builds things that sort of the team staff uses to interact with our findings, so the website and all that stuff. And then the third member is data engineer, so he does like pre-data processing, so takes care of stuff so that I have something to look at. And then we have a supervisor. So because we have very different roles, we all work pretty separately, so it's easier for us to work from home. The downside of that is that there's not a lot of need for, since we're not working together constantly, now we're very isolated. So, we have weekly meetings with my boss and then occasional larger group meetings. So, we're just at home churning away.
I heard that the hockey season was suspended for a few months. How did that affect your work?
Yeah, so it was definitely a confusing time. Like I said, as far as the off-season question, for me, it weirdly made very little difference because, I'm doing this laying the groundwork stuff and Not relying on new data. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing now is looking at like the past several seasons of data. So nothing really changed for my workflow as even though there were no new hockey games happening. It did change sort of our overall sort of organization as a group. Like I said, the way my boss has traditionally run the department, which I haven't been here for before because it's my first year, is that we sort of work one way during the season and then another way during the off season. And so we had this sort of semi-off season that we didn't know how long it would take. So there was a little bit of shifting around and saying like, okay, is this now our big project time? Is this, when we should be doing these things? No one quite knew when the draft was happening. So then it was, when do we need to be prepared for these points? But luckily most of that was happening sort of above my head. So I was turning away and just waiting to see what happened.
What was the hardest part of quarantine for you personally?
It's very isolating. So I finished my PhD in December and I moved here in January. And it turns out that wasn't a great time to move cross country. So I moved from San Francisco to Raleigh. I live alone and I, I had only started to sort of build a community in Raleigh. So I have, very few local friends. So the good news is, I've been able to keep up with people online and, my classmates who I moved away from. But it definitely has been, a very solitary existence for the past couple months.
What did you do over quarantine to keep you busy?
I got a cat, which is great. So now I have some company. Did some sort of the traditional started baking more. I started gardening. I have a backyard for the first time in a while. So I have a mostly a semi-successful garden. It was successful in that it was entertaining. Didn't yield much, but worked on some various craft projects. I knit a lot. Got to know my immediate neighborhood very well by going on a lot of walks around it. But otherwise hanging pretty close to home and just trying to roll with it.
What other careers are similar to yours?
Yeah, so there's sort of two sides to that. There's the data side and the sports side. So, like I said, my title is data scientist, which is this vague title that applies to all sorts of things. But basically, the idea with data science is, asking, trying to figure out how to use sort of big, complicated data sets to answer questions. And, that can obviously mean anything. So I have a friend who's a data scientist at Stitch Fix, and her job is figuring out based on, people's how they rate clothing, what other clothing they might like, and sort of building a style algorithm from data. I have other friends who work in health data science, and so that's things like predicting future disease progression from past health. So there's a lot of advertising stuff. So basically, almost any problem you can think of, if it produces a lot of data, you can probably have data scientists doing it. On the sports analytics side, I sort of mentioned the different people in my team. So things are growing a lot in sports analytics now. And so, the Dodgers just won the World Series and they have like 20 people on their analytics staff. And so that's, everyone from, people like me who are in the sort of more theoretical, creation kind of roles. People, like I said, we have a data engineer who works with us who's more of the sort of concrete parsing of data. In some places, you'll have stuff split out where there's people who are focused on data scientists in sort of a biometrics and health data role. So they spend a lot of time looking at heart rate and movements and stuff related to that versus strategy type stuff. And all of that interfacing with various other places in the organizations to try and use those findings to be of benefit. Because again, it's all fun for me to just research hockey, but the reason I am paid to do that is so it benefits the team. So that can get broken down into all sorts of different roles.
You stated in the athletic article that you were a field hockey goalie. Did your love for hockey affect why you chose this job?
Yeah, absolutely. So I played field hockey in high school, and I also played a little bit of ice hockey in college. I was very bad at it, but I did play. And I've been a big hockey fan for a long time. And so absolutely, it's why I was interested in this job. It wasn't my plan. I didn't go to grad school for neuroscience in order to become a sports data scientist. But that's partially because I never considered it as an option for someone with my sort of background and skill sets. I didn't think that there was necessarily a space there, but it's something that I've been interested in for a long time. I followed hockey analytics casually, and a lot of people do work online, and following various people on Twitter and blogs, and it's something that was always sort of a casual interest of mine, and like I said, just had never conceived of as an actual professional interest. And then this time last year, actually a little more than a year ago, this job was posted, and the job description was literally like, we're looking for someone who likes hockey and has experience working with spatiotemporal data sets, such as computational neuroscientists. It's like, well, that is me. So maybe I should give it a whirl. And now here we are. So it was very much an accident, but a happy accident that was influenced by me already being interested in it.
What advice would you give to someone interested in the analytics field?
I think a lot of it, so, the big thing with any sort of these analytics jobs are, the being able to ask questions and use data in interesting ways. So, like I said, that is what was useful from my PhD into this job, not necessarily the exact domain knowledge in sports. And so sort of thinking about those, you can translate that skill set to a lot of different problems, whatever you might be interested in, whatever jobs might be available. And so, it's, trying to think of advice is difficult because I took a sort of weird sideways route. So my advice is not to follow my weird sideways route. That's not the most efficient way. But just the foundation is strong analytical skills in general, not necessarily hyper specific sports analytics or anything. And so that comes from that can come from a variety of backgrounds. And, I think what's most helpful is figuring out something that you're interested in, and that'll, help you work on it more effectively. And so, rather than just sitting down and saying, I want to figure out how to do analytics, I'm interested in how you would solve this problem. Is there a way that I could work on that and sort of, getting in through a sort of experience standpoint from that direction rather than just rote skill acquisition, I think is in the long run more beneficial, because you'll be more motivated to do things if you care about the problem you're trying to solve, rather than just saying, I need to learn how to write Python code to parse a database. Like, I don't know, that'll maybe be a skill you can use, but if you can only get you so far if you're dragging yourself through it.
What was the best experience in your job so far?
A lot of it's just been very surreal to be able to sort of be here. So, even while I was still in California, the Hurricanes came out and had a game in San Jose. And so I went to the game with my now boss, and just, realizing like, oh, this is what I'm doing now. This is, I am have a fancy all access pass and I'm standing next to these people who like I saw on TV, and this is, you know, where I am now. I mentioned the draft stuff earlier, that, you know, it was sort of a small one-off thing I did, but, you know, it was actually getting used on the day of, and there was some, you know, write-up of, you know, some reporter was sitting in the Hurricanes draft room and mentioned what I know is, you know, the stuff that I was working on. Obviously that was, you know, it was not how it was written about, but it's like, oh, this is actually like people are listening to what I'm saying, and, you know, I am in the room where these decisions are happening, and I'm getting to, you know, do this really fun sort of data analysis projects and get to ask these fun questions. And also, you know, people are interested in hearing my feedback on it is still really exciting.
To wrap up, how do you expect hockey analytics to grow for you and for in general?
Yeah, so the reason I was hired, and what has still not quite happened because of the season getting delayed, is that hockey is getting player tracking data, which is going to completely change everything. So right now, hockey data is based on sort of discrete events, so shots and goals and something. And so if you think about something like baseball, which is the classic where analytics started, you can describe baseball really well based on events. Like, you know, there's more to the game. You want to watch the game too, but as far as knowing what happened, you can summarize it and get pretty much all the details. But if you think about something like hockey or soccer, if you just list the events in a game, you're only getting a very small fraction of what happened. You know, knowing all of the shots that were taken doesn't help you picture what happened in the game. So it's much harder to do interesting analysis when you only have this, you know, very blurry, tiny snapshot. And so what we're getting now soon is this full player and puck tracking data. So that'll tell us where everyone is at all times. So now we can know everything, but also it's a huge data set that has way more challenges to deal with. So shots can only tell you so much, but it's pretty easy to figure out how to analyze them, versus tracking data can tell you a ton of stuff, but you have to figure out how to get that out. And so I think that'll be transformative. A lot of people sort of, you know, knock on hockey analytics saying, you know, how can you possibly capture the game if you're only looking at these small things? Now we'll be able to look at much bigger things. And we'll be able to look at what players are doing in sort of build-up plays. So we'll be able to look at defense. It's really hard to analyze defense if all you know is what the other team is doing. And so, you know, getting just all these new avenues getting opened up with this new data. And I think hopefully, so from an analytics standpoint, that means there's all this new stuff we can do. For my job, that means all these new things to conquer. And in parallel to that, I think the NHL in general and sort of the front offices are getting a lot more willing to use data and to listen to analytics. There's been a lot of resistance, and, you know, people, the stereotypical refrain is you should just watch the game and, you know, use the eye test. And people are starting to realize that, okay, there are actually things, you know, that this can help us with. And so I'm expecting that increasingly we'll be able to do more sophisticated things, and also we'll be able to have those things listened to and used. And so really change the way that we're both analyzing things and also, you know, influencing the workflow. So I think it should be a pretty exciting couple of years.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.